Just say Gvirotai.
You say whatever you want, Rabbi. We like you anyway.
Okay, so I've been teaching in the Women's Study Days since it was founded, about 27 years. And Diane always gives me a challenge. I frequently end up teaching something I've never taught before. So this is no exception. The question was, or my question was, what can we learn from our sources in history to help us deal with our current situation? I know that we think our current situation is terrible since October 7th. Jews are very good at thinking that everything is terrible. I think that the way to deal with a current problem is to look back in history as to how our ancestors dealt with similar or bigger problems. And as we'll see in a moment, their problems were much bigger than our problems. And the 4 episodes I would like to study with you are the destruction of the first temple, Korban Bayit Rishon, destruction of the second temple, Korban Bayit Sheni, Gerus Sfarad, the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, and of course the Shoah. And I hope that by the end of the hour we can draw some inspiration from them as to how they dealt with their crisis. And since this is the second time I'm teaching this today, I taught it before in Hebrew, I'm going to spend less time on Korban Bayit Rishon and more time on the other 3 episodes. Let me ask you a question. Other than God, what is the most mentioned topic in the entire Tanakh?
Jerusalem?
Jerusalem is in the right direction. How many times is Jerusalem mentioned in the Tanakh?
500 or 600 times.
700 something times. How many times, by the way, is Jerusalem mentioned in the Quran?
None.
0. Okay. But that's the subject of a different lecture. Well, Jerusalem is in the right direction. The subject I was hinting at was the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael.
Land of Israel.
If you take Eretz Yisrael, land of Israel, out of the Tanakh, you have no Tanakh. Being a vegetarian, it's like having an avocado sandwich without the avocado. If you're a carnivore, it's like having a hamburger without the hamburger. There is no Tanakh without Eretz Yisrael. And from the very beginning of our people, that was clearly the case. And I'm going to mention a few texts that I did not Xerox here. There are more source sheets here on the table, right there.
Yeah, can you pass it back on me the material because I didn't
Well,
get
Francis needed one.
And normally I would be standing up and talking, but if I stand up and talk, the people at home won't see. What happens if I stand up? Yeah, that's what I thought. It is.
It's almost like a sorority college. I feel like go back to the college time, like a sorority.
Does it tilt? No. So by coincidence this week I gave a Zoom lecture to some 60 Reform rabbis on the subject of 4,000 years of Zionism. So I'm going to mention at the beginning now a few texts that I did not Xerox for you, which I Xerox for them, because you can only understand the impact of the destruction of the first temple if you understand exactly how important Eretz Yisrael was to the people of Israel during the first temple period. What is God's first conversation with Abraham? Lech lecha. Genesis chapter 12. Lech lecha me'artzecha me'uladetecha me'beit avicha el ha'aretz asher ar'echa. Get you up and go from your land, from the place you were born, to the place I will show you. Now that entire speech talks about what God is going to do with Abraham, and what is he going to do with him? He's going to take him to a land I will show you. And there you and your seed will have a people, etc., etc., etc. In other words, the entire promise of God to Abraham is based on making Aliyah and what you're going to do in that country once you get there. Similarly, Brit Ben Abtarim, the covenant between the pieces, sounds much better in Hebrew. Genesis chapter 15, right? He takes him outside to look at the stars. Ko yezarecha, your seed will be as numerous as the stars. And you will go down to Egypt and you will come back. And what will you come back to? This land, and this will be the land for you and your descendants. So both the covenant with God and Abraham leaving Ur of Chaldees, Ur Kasdim, and coming to Eretz Israel, and the covenant, the Brit Ben Abtarim, is entirely interconnected with the land of Israel. And similarly, when God speaks to the Jewish people through Moses, Shemot chapter 6, we have the Arba Lashonot Geulah, the 4 languages of redemption, which, of course, according to the rabbis in the Babylonian Talmud, are the basis for the 4 cups of wine at the Seder. What are the 4 verbs? Hotzeti, V'itzati, V'ga'alti, V'lakachti. I shall take you out, I shall save you, I shall redeem you, and I shall take you. But if you actually open up the verses there, you'll see that Chazal were only honing in on 4 verbs, but there are 7 verbs in that paragraph. And what are the 7 verbs? Hotzeti, Hitzalti, Ga'alti, Lakachti, Vayiti lachem Elohim, and I will be for you for a God. Veheveti etchem ala aretz, and I will bring you to the land, which I gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. V'natati ota, okay? V'natati ota lachem morashani Hashem. So there are really 7 languages of Geulah, of redemption there, and 2 out of the 7 have to do with the land of Israel. Ve'eveti etchem ala aretz, I shall bring you to the land. V'natati ota lachem morashani Hashem, and I shall give it to you for an inheritance. I am God. And finally, the last passage in the Torah, which is a precursor to what we're going to study, is Dvarim chapter 26. The beginning of Parshat Kitavo. Does anybody know what ceremony is described there?
It's my son's parsha.
Okay, Bikurim. Okay, the first fruits. And what is the first fruit ceremony there? The first fruit ceremony is you shall come up to Jerusalem, bring your fruits, you hand them to the Kohen. Okay? And what do you say? Arami oved avi, vayeret Mitzrayma, vayagro sham bimtei me'at, vayareo otanu ha'mitzrim vaya'anunu, vayitnu aleinu avodah kasha, vanitzak al Hashem Elokei avotenu. It's the story of the Exodus from Egypt, which is the center of what ceremony? Pesach, the Seder. In other words, these verses of Bikurim became the basis of the Pesach Seder. The entire Midrash is on those verses. And what's at the end of those verses that we don't recite at the Seder? God brought us to this place. He gave us this land. Land flowing with milk and honey. And now I have brought these first fruits, and I put them before God, and I bow before God, and you shall rejoice in all the good which God gave you, etc., etc. In other words, we were brought out of Egypt in order to come to the land of Israel. We now have crops, and we're giving them as a gift to God as Bikurim. So this Zionist passage is the basis both of the Bikurim ceremony and of the Seder on Pesach. So these few short passages show us just how central Eretz Yisrael is to the Tanakh and to the Jewish people. Without Eretz Yisrael, in the eyes of the Tanakh, there is no Jewish people. Okay? In light of that, we can understand what happens after the destruction of the first temple. And what happens is depression. And if we look at the source sheet now, for those of you at home, I will scroll down. It's the first page of your source sheet. Tehillim Kuf Lamed Zayin, Psalm 137. Okay, this is a question for extra credit and for an ice cream cone. Where in the Siddur is this paragraph of Psalms printed? In the Siddur, not in the Tanakh.
Where's ice cream?
Yafeh Me'od. I owe you an ice cream. We just have to find a place. Okay, in your regular, any Siddur you open up your Karamazon, you'll see on one column there's Shir HaMalot, which we sing on Shabbat and Chagim, and the other column is this psalm, which nobody ever says. It could be there are 3 people in Mea Shearim who still say it. This is an incredibly depressing psalm. This is a psalm of Jews or a Jew who's been exiled to Babel, and this is his reaction to being exiled to Babel. Al Na'arot Babel, Sham Yashavnu Gam Bachinu. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept as we thought of Zion. We hung up our lyres, right? Kinorot. For our captors asked us there for songs, our tormentors for amusement. They said, play these instruments you brought with you from the land of Israel. Ech nashir et shir Hashem al admat nechar. How can we sing the songs of God in a strange land? And then, Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yimini, if I forget you, Jerusalem, let my right hand wither, etc., etc. Im lo aleh Yerushalayim aros simchati. Total, utter depression. Let's all jump off a bridge into the Prat or the Hideka, right? Into the two big rivers in Babylon. In other words, the person who wrote this psalm, which is clearly shortly after the Jews have been exiled to Babylon in the year 586 BCE, there's no hope. It's all gloom and doom. We're done for. We have no land of Israel. We have nothing to rejoice about. And then the last passage, which we're not going to read, is God should take vengeance on the Babylonians. So this is one reaction to Churban Bayit Rishon, which is utter depression. Basically, our life is over as Jews. The second approach is that of Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah chapter 29, which is the next page.
Well, he was a happy guy.
What?
He was a happy guy.
Who, Jeremiah?
When he got his ice cream, of course.
Well, Jeremiah, I would say, was a realist. He predicted the Churban, and that's exactly what happened, and nobody believed it. So, we're going to read this passage in two sections. Who would like to read the verses 4 to 7, please, in English? Volunteer?
I'll do that.
Please. This is in lieu of Glida.
I knew you would jump on that. Thus said the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to the whole community which I exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their fruit. Take wives and beget sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there, do not decrease, and seek the welfare of the city to which I have exiled you, and pray to the Lord in its behalf, for in its prosperity you shall prosper.
Okay, so let's stop here. There's a continuation, which we'll see in a moment. If we're to stop here, what is the approach of Jeremiah to the exile into Babylon? Babel?
You should settle in.
Settle in. You're in for the long haul. Build houses, get married, have children. V'shalom Yisrael. So if we were to stop here, we would say, well, this is an anti-Zionist passage, right? Forget about the land of Israel. You're stuck there. Make the best of it. However, that is not the simple meaning of this passage. Let us skip to verse 10. Please continue.
Is that me?
Mm-hmm.
I think there were 2 ice creams. For thus said the Lord, when Babylon's 70 years are over, I will take note of you, and I will fulfill to you my promise of favor to bring you back to this place. For I am mindful of the plans I've made concerning you, declares the Lord. Plans for your welfare, not for disaster, to give you a hopeful future. When you call me and come and pray to me, I will give heed to you. You will search for me and find me. If only you seek me wholeheartedly, I will be at hand for you, declares the Lord. And I will restore your fortunes, and I will gather you from all the nations and from all the places to which I have banished you, declares the Lord. And I will bring you back to the place from which I have exiled you.
Okay, so what does Jeremiah say?
They also, once they prospered, very prospered in Babylon, they didn't want them there anymore, like everything else.
That's true too. But what is Jeremiah saying? He's saying, in the first half, he's saying, get used to it, build houses, have children, get married, have children. What's he saying in the second half?
He says, I'll bring you back. And even if you're going to be 135 years, take your vitamins and it'll be okay.
In other words, in 70 years, I'm going to bring you back. And that's more or less what happened, right? Around the year, we'll get to the Cyrus Declaration in a minute, which is from 538 BCE. The destruction was 586 BCE. Zerubbabel, the The big wave of Aliyah began around 520 BCE. So it was more or less 70 years that the Jewish people began to return from Babel to Eretz Yisrael. In other words, this is different from Tehillim chapter 137 in two ways. Tehillim chapter 137 is simply depressed, it's the end of the world. The first half here says, get used to it, build houses, have children in Babel. Second half says, and wait. And in 70 years you're going back home. Okay, so this is a totally different approach to the approach of Tehillim chapter 137. So the way that Yirmiyahu deals with this tragedy, which was a huge tragedy, was A, settle down, but B, you're coming back again in 70 years.
But isn't this typical, I think, of anyone? All of a sudden there's a tragedy. October 7th, we all feel awful, horrible, depressed. And then we think, well, let's start dealing with it, let's do something. And then you even go on for hope that you can rebuild.
Right. But it also might have to do when these passages were written. It could be that Psalm 137 was written the day they got to Babel, right? Their captors are saying, play your lyres, play your kinorot. It could be, I'm sure the scholars have said when this is from. It could be the Jeremiah passages later. So lots of times dealing with tragedy has to do with exactly when you are writing, exactly when you are reacting. The third reaction is Yechezkel chapter 37, which is a very, very famous chapter. I'll scroll down here. Can anybody sing me the Negro spiritual about this chapter? Them bones, them dry bones, them bones, dry bones, them bones, them dry bones. Hear the word of the Lord. The head bone connects to the neck bone, the neck bone connects to the shoulder bone connects to the neck bone. Hear the word of the Lord. You have to have Louis Armstrong sing it. Okay? This is a very popular song. It was a Negro spiritual. And also the Valley of the Dry Bones was important in Jewish and Christian art. Have any of you heard of Duri Ropus?
Oh, yes.
Okay, what was Duri Ropus? Or what is Duri Ropus?
Okay, yeah, that's often mentioned in Shalom Sabah's lectures. In fact, invariably, it was a shul in what is currently Syria, and the thing was that it was covered with sand for a long, long time because it was on an outer wall of the city, and so to defend the city, so when they discovered it, it was all in perfect condition under the sand, and it has these fabulous paintings on the walls depicting biblical scenes.
Right. So this is a synagogue built in Duri Ropus around the year 248 of the Common Era. And just 8 years later, they filled it up with sand because there was a war between the Persians and the Romans, Persian and Roman empires. And that's exactly what was preserved. You see in the murals on the wall, there's a line. Everything above the line is gone, and everything below the line is perfectly preserved in color. And the synagogue still exists. It was discovered in an archaeological excavation around 1932. They moved it to the National Museum in Damascus. Believe it or not, it is still there. And a Jewish group from the States recently visited and saw the original Duri Ropus murals in the Damascus Museum. And there's a full-size...
Why they cannot return here?
Well, I don't think the Syrians are going to give it to us. There's a full-scale replica at Yale University because the archaeological excavation was run by Yale University. And on the internet, just write Duri Ropus, you'll see all the pictures in color. In my opinion, the most spectacular picture there is the vision of the dry bones. You see Ezekiel standing in the valley, surrounded by all these body parts, literally, and they're coming back to life.
Rabbi, a piece of the scroll was found in Masada in the synagogue.
What? Of what?
Of the dry bones.
Oh, Yechezkel Lamed.
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Which is always a good point for tour guides.
So the question is, what is Ezekiel talking about here? So many people understood this passage literally, that Ezekiel is talking about the resurrection of the dead. I don't think that is true. He's talking about the resurrection of a dead people, which is the Jewish people. And he's telling them that they will come back to life and they will be brought back to the land of Israel. And he says, Verse 7, suddenly there's a sound of rattling, the bones come together, bone to matching bone. There were sinews and flesh. Then he said to me, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, O mortal. The four winds shall come. The breath entered them, and they came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast multitude. And he said to me, Ha'atzamota ele kol beit Yisrael hema, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, I want to see the Hebrew, Hine omrim, yavshu atzmotenu ve'avda tikvatenu. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
Right? Our bones dried up, ve'avda tikvatenu. That is the source of right? That is straight from this verse.
Oh, wow.
Nigzarnu lanu, and you shall say to them, I'm going to open up your graves, and I will take you up. Ve'eveti etchem al admat Yisrael, which is almost the exact same expression we saw in the book of Shmot. And you shall know that I am the Lord your God, and I shall give life within you, etc., etc., etc. What I think Ezekiel was prophesying in Babylon, and some of his prophecies actually say that he's sitting on Nahar X, right, sitting on a river in Babylon. He's saying to the Jews of Babylon, there is hope, you're going to come back to life, and God is going to bring you to the land of Israel. I don't think he's talking about dead bones, he's talking about human beings. And he's promising that the Jewish people will be redeemed. And what happened in the end? What in the end happened is that the Jewish people were redeemed. And now let us look at Ezra chapter 1 and 6.
Can I?
You have questions or comments? Please feel free.
I just wanted to recommend to anybody who doesn't know, at 6 o'clock in the morning on Yom HaShoah, on Reshet Bet, there is a reading of this piece.
Oh, when they, at the beginning of the radio,
Yeah, when the radio opens. I can't remember the name of the guy who does it, but he's got this fabulous
he's a great reader.
with the rhymes with the real which I can't do. And it just makes you shiver, it's so amazing.
Yeah. And it's also the Haftarah on Pesach.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so what was the result of this? The result of this was that in the end, Cyrus the Great, Amalek Koresh, he's one of the people who has a street in Jerusalem and actually deserves a street name in Jerusalem. He started his empire in 539 BCE, and 1 year later he issued this decree. Now, there were many scholars, especially non-Jewish scholars, who thought that this decree was a fiction. It appears here in Ezra chapter 1 in Hebrew. It appears in Ezra chapter 6 in biblical Aramaic. But it sounds just too good to be true. And not only does he say that the Jewish people should go back to the land of Israel, he says they should rebuild the temple. He says, and in the second passage, Darius the king says, and I'm going to provide you animals to sacrifice every day. And Cyrus says, and I'm going to provide you with the building materials to rebuild the temple. It sounds too good to be true. In the year 1879, in an archaeological dig somewhere in Babylon, they discovered a plaque, and you can see it on the internet. In Hebrew, I think it's called Glil Koresh, the scroll of Koresh. And it sounds very much like this text, only it was not written to the Jews. The Jews are not mentioned. It is a general statement by Cyrus the Great saying that every nation under his control should observe their own religion. And this was a totally different way of doing empires. The normal way you do empires is that you steamroll over everything and you make them all observe your religion, right? Which is, of course, exactly what the Romans did to us. Well, first the Greek Syrians under the Maccabees, 2nd century BCE. The Romans arrive in Eretz Yisrael, 63 BCE. And what were they fighting with the Jews about all the time? Judaism. They said, we don't want you to practice this primitive religion. We want you to practice our religion. And one of the things that the Romans did is they tried to put up a statue of Caligula in the Second Temple around the year 40 of the Common Era. So Cyrus's approach was totally different. He says every nation should observe their own religion. I'm going to encourage it. I'm even going to pay for it. In other words, we now know that there is no reason to doubt at all what it says in Hatzarat Koresh. And by the way, what I discovered today, which I didn't know, in chapter 3 of Ezra, it's not, in modern Hebrew, this is called Hatzarat Koresh, Cyrus's declaration. In Ezra chapter 3, it's called Rishyon Koresh, the license of Koresh. Because the book of Ezra gives this document a title. This was the license of Koresh to rebuild the temple in the year of King Cyrus of Persia. The word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah was fulfilled. Okay, what we read before. And this is a quote. Thus said King Cyrus of Persia, the Lord God of heaven has given me all the kings of the earth and has charged me with building him a house in Jerusalem. It is my duty to build you a temple in Jerusalem. Any one of you of all his people, may his God be with him, go up to Jerusalem, build the house of the Lord. And I really like verse 4. This is the founding of the UJA. And all who stay behind, wherever he may be living, let the people of his place assist him with silver, gold, goods, and livestock. In other words, those of you who are not making aliyah should at least contribute money. That's what Cyrus says, right? They should put posters of Cyrus in the Israel Aliyah office, right? And the same thing in Ezra chapter 6, which we're not going to read, which was written in a beautiful biblical Aramaic. In other words, we have here 4 stages of dealing with the destruction of the first temple. The first stage in Psalm 137 is total depression. The second stage in Jeremiah 29 is get used to it, but in 70 years you're going home. The third in Ezekiel chapter 37 is you're all going home. God's going to bring those dry bones together and bring you back to the land of Israel. And the fourth is that actually happens. That King Cyrus says that the Jews are free to go back and go build the temple, and I will even provide the building materials, and I will even provide the sacrifices to be offered there. Okay? So this is the first catastrophe and reactions to it. Yes?
What percentage of them actually did go back from Babylon? How many stayed in Babylon?
I did not check that for today, but it was a relatively small number. You can find some of the numbers in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. There are lists of families, lists of people. But the question is, out of how many? You say 10,000 came back. Well, 10,000 out of... clearly there were a lot of Jews who stayed alive. But I don't think we know the exact percentage.
In that case, the Jews left made the decision to stay in Egypt or Babylon. Today, they will be living there still, isn't it?
Well, there were Jews living in Iraq until 1948, 9. Yeah. They left because of the anti-Semitism there, which arose as a result of the state of Israel. The Jews were in Babylon for 2,500 years.
So maybe some of their descendants are still maybe living
in Babel. Most of them left in 1940.
Oh, okay.
And in Egypt till at least 67.
Right. In Egypt, even after the creation of the state of Israel, there were still Jewish communities in Egypt, and then the anti-Semitism became so bad under Nasser that they left.
So they left.
Right. Now there are a handful of old women, I think, living in Cairo.
They were kicked out with nothing. They didn't leave, they were kicked out.
Right. No, but there are a few people who stayed there. I don't know how they managed to do it. But there's some old women living in Cairo who were born and raised in Cairo.
Wow.
Okay. We segue to the destruction of the Second Temple. Year 70 of the Common Era. The Great Revolt against the Romans lasted roughly from 66 of the Common Era to 73 of the Common Era. The so-called nail in the coffin was Masada, which was the last stronghold of the Jewish people after the destruction. And the siege on Jerusalem lasted for a number of years and is described in great detail by Josephus. The Babylonian Talmud is not usually interested in history per se. Most of the stories it tells about history are extremely elaborate, extremely interesting, and not at all true. Well, that's not surprising. They were written hundreds of years later in Babel. Why should they know what happened in the land of Israel 400 years before? But what's interesting about the stories of the Babylonian Talmud is they always have a point, because they're trying to teach us a lesson. They're not interested in the history, they're interested in the lesson. And the first story here, let's look at the English version. That's a bet, I called it bet Echad, bet 1. I first gave you the Hebrew version from Bialik and Rabnitsky's Sefer Haggadah, and then the English version from the classic Sonsino Talmud. Okay, this is one of the longest and most elaborate stories in the Babylonian Talmud. It's found in the Tractate of Gittin, folio 56, Daf Nun Vav. It starts in the middle of folio A and ends in the middle of folio B. It's an entire page of one story. And the story is how Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai got out of Jerusalem and was saved, and then created a new academy in Yavne. Did any of you see the film Agadat HaChorban, The Legend of the Destruction? Okay, guys, homework. No ice cream.
Nobody believes you.
Homework.
Can we watch YouTube for free? What's the name?
Okay, I don't know if you can find it for free on the internet, but periodically they show it at
What is it
movie
called?
festivals.
What's the
In
name?
Hebrew it's called Agadat HaChorban. In English it's called The Legend of the Destruction. It's one of the few movies I've seen twice in my life. It is an animated film about the destruction of the Second Temple, which sounds really weird, right? It's absolutely brilliant. It was made by an Israeli director named Gidi Dar. Agadat HaChorban, The Legend of the Destruction.
Legend.
Of the destruction. And every year in the summer there are things going around the internet. If you would like to bring this movie to your synagogue, please contact It's a brilliant movie as a movie because it's called an animated film, but it's not an animated film. It is 1,500 paintings. But the way he did it, you think they're moving. It's absolutely brilliant. And he has the best Israeli actors voicing it. It could be that there's an English version where it's dubbed, I don't know. But one of the things and much of it is taken from this passage in Gittin. So what happens is the Sikari, the extreme Jewish zealots, they burn up all the food in Jerusalem, and they burn up all the wood in Jerusalem, and they burn up all the oil in Jerusalem. Why? Because they want the situation to become more dire than it already is. And if this sounds like terrorist organizations you've heard of, it's not a coincidence. Okay? The Talmud says there was enough food in Jerusalem for 21 years, and that the Sikari burned it all up. The number 21 is a round number, but apparently there was plenty of food in Jerusalem. And the Sikari burned it up in order to force the Jews of Jerusalem to fight against the Romans. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai sees there's no hope here. This is not going to end well. And he disguises himself as a dead person because there were no cemeteries inside the city. And his students, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, put him in a coffin. And they take him outside the city, and the guards want to poke the body to make sure that it's dead. And of course the students say, well, how could you possibly poke Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the leader of the Jewish people? So they don't poke the body. And as soon as he's outside the city, he gets out of the coffin and he goes to see Vespasian, in Hebrew Aspasianus, who was the Roman general. And he says to him, he doesn't say, Yechi Adonenu Moreinu V'Rabbeinu HaMelech HaMashiach. He says, Yechi HaMelech. He says, long live the king. He wasn't a king, he was a general. And then the story goes on, and we get to this paragraph. At this point, it's in brackets. At this point, a messenger came to him from Rome saying, up, for the emperor is dead, and the nobles of Rome decided to make you head of the state. And that's exactly what happened. Vespasian is elected the emperor, and he has to go back to Rome. Who took over as the general destroying the second temple? Who destroyed the second temple? Not Vespasian, but Titus. What was their relationship? Titus was Vespasian's son. Okay? So he has to go back to Rome, and he has to appoint a new general. I'm skipping the story about the boot, which is very interesting, but we don't have time. At the end of the paragraph, the boot went on, he said to him, okay, it's on the page.
Doesn't make sense.
On the page, it's here. He said to him, seeing that you are so wise, okay. He said to him, I am now going, next paragraph, and will send someone to take my place. You can, however, make a request of me and I will grant it. As he says to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, since you prophesied my becoming the emperor, you now have a wish. Make a wish, and I will grant it. What does Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai say? Give me Yavne and its wise men, and the family chain of Rabbi Gamliel, and the physicians to your Rabbi Tzadok. And then the Talmud makes a comment, why in the world didn't he ask him to save Jerusalem? Because he says, give you one wish. Well, the one wish should be, don't destroy the temple. So what does the Talmud say? He thought that so much he would not grant. In other words, if he had asked him not to destroy the temple, that was totally impossible. This is what Roman did to the people that they decided had rebelled against them. There were plenty of rebels in the land of Israel who wanted to get rid of the Romans. There was no way that was going to happen. But Yavne v'chachamea to Vespasian, who cares? Okay, you want Yavne and a bunch of rabbis? Okay, you can have it. Okay? Now, was there actually an academy in Yavne at the time? According to Professor Dayaw Alon, no, there was not. Yavne is not mentioned as a center of Jewish learning before the destruction. It became a center of Jewish learning immediately after the destruction. So the Babylonian rabbis are mashlichim achoranit, they are doing a anachronism and pretending there was already an academy in Yavne. And this is what I said about the Babylonian Talmud. The point here is not the historical facts. The point here is the point. How did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai save the Jewish people? Through Yavne. Because in Yavne he totally redid Judaism. Judaism until the year 70 was totally based on the Beit Mikdash, on the temple. No temple, no Judaism. You want to pray to God, what do? You go to Jerusalem, you're making a sacrifice. You want to atone for sins, what do? You go to Jerusalem. You want to have a Passover celebration, what do? You go to Jerusalem. You want to have a Sukkot celebration, what do? You go to Jerusalem. There is no Jewish life not based on the temple. And all of a sudden, there's no temple. And what did he do? He created an alternative in Yavne. And if you want to see what he did there, and this is just an inkling, we have to skip the next 2 pages because of... do we have time? So when do we have? 3:20. Okay, we do have time for one more thing. So before we get to what he did in Yavne, I want to look at one more passage with you, which is Sanhedrin Lamed Bet, 32b. You can look at the English or the Hebrew. Okay, it says at the top Bet Shtayim and Sanhedrin 32b. Okay, and if you want to follow in the Hebrew, it's where my finger is. It's 5 lines before the wide lines on the page, and Sanhedrin. In the English, it's the passage I put in brackets. Tanor Rabbanan, our sages have taught, Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof. Justice, justice shall thou pursue. We all know the verse. This means follow the scholars to their academies. Rabbi Eliezer to Lud, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to Borochayo, Rabbi Joshua to Ki'in, Rabbi Gamliel to Yavne, Rabbi Akiva to Bnei Brak, Rabbi Matya to Rome, Rabbi Hanania ben Tradion to Sifni, Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta to Sepphoris, Rabbi Judah ben Betera to Nisibis, which is in Babylon, Rabbi Joshua to the exile, which is also Babylon, Rabbi to Bet Sharim, or the sages to the chamber of the Himself. What's going on here? This is a list of famous Tanaim, of famous rabbis of the Mishnah, each of whom founded an academy in these cities. Now, what does that have to do with my topic? It has everything to do with my topic. Some of the cities listed here are not in the land of Israel. Okay? We have Matya ben Cheresh, who is setting up an academy in Rome. We have Rabbi Yehuda ben Teru setting up an academy in Nitzibin, Nisibis, in Babel. And the Rabbi Joshua mentioned here is not the famous Rabbi Joshua you've heard of. This is another Rabbi Joshua who sets up an academy in Babylon. So what's happening here is the diffusion of Jewish authority and of the rabbis, right? We can no longer have a religion that is based on one city, that everything is focused on Jerusalem. We need Jewish academies, we need yeshivot everywhere, because Jews are being scattered everywhere. If they don't have yeshivot, they're not going to survive as a people. They have to have leadership in all of these different cities. So as usual, the Babylonian Talmud is not interested in my history. Right? It's just saying this rabbi went there and this rabbi went. What I'm saying is this shows us the dispersion of rabbinic authority throughout the Jewish world in the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era after the destruction of the Second Temple. And now I want to skip to the last page of it regarding the Second Temple, and that is Mishnah Rosh Hashanah chapter 4. You can look at it in the Hebrew, which is Bet 4, or in the English. Guess I have to. Where is the circle? Circle it around. I don't see it. Hello. Anybody good at Zoom here? I don't see a circle here to circle this text around. Oh, here we go. I don't want to upgrade that for that Pro. I just want to turn this text around.
Oh, you want to turn the text around?
Yeah, usually there's a circle here. Oh, maybe over here?
No, it's the annotation.
Sorry. Okay, the people at home, you'll have to lie on your sides and read the text. It'll give you time for a good Friday afternoon nap. There's no arrow. Yes, this is Herbert Danby's classic translation of the Mishnah. For those of you who don't know, at the beginning of the 20th century, there were a number of very famous Protestant scholars who knew more about Judaism than most Jews, and one of them was Herbert Danby. This translation of the Mishnah was published in Oxford in 1926. And it's still the best English translation of the Mishnah.
Herbert who?
Danby, D-A-N-B-Y. I wrote at the top, translated by Herbert Danby. It's been reprinted many, many times. Now, what happens? So Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai gets to Yavne. He sets up an academy, and then right after, when he passes away, Rabbi Gamliel is the Nasi there. What did they do there? They recreated the Jewish religion. You no longer have sacrifices. So how are you supposed to pray to God? Pray. Who instituted prayer 3 times a day? The rabbis in Yavne. Okay? Who wrote the Amida, the silent devotion, which is the core of the prayer? The rabbis at Yavne. The Passover Seder. There was no Passover Seder in the Second Temple period. You can look through all of Josephus and Philo and all the Second Temple books. You won't find any Passover Seder. What you find is Korban Pesach. There was no Passover Seder. They invented something entirely new. They took the Greek symposium, where the Greeks would lie on couches, they would eat hors d'oeuvres, the servants would come in and pour their wine, sound familiar? They would have a lot of cups of wine, they would discuss stuff all night long, then they would have a big meal, and they would keep discussing stuff all night long. Okay? They took this framework of the Greek symposium, they totally emptied the contents and put in the new contents of Yetziat Mitzrayim, etc., and they built the Passover Seder from scratch. There is no Passover Seder before Yavne. Okay? And one of the other things that Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai did is that he made a series of 9 takanot. What are takanot? Rules, but the usual translation is rabbinic enactments. Okay? You've heard of all of takanot Rabbeinu Gershon, right? That you're not allowed to have a man's not allowed to have more than one wife. Those are takanot from the 10th century. These are takanot from the 1st century. Okay? And in the Mishnah and in the Talmud, in the tractate of Rosh Hashanah, they discuss these 9 takanot of Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai. And I only want to discuss 2 of them with you. It just so happens I wrote my doctorate on the tractate of Rosh Hashanah, but not about these passages. If a festival day of the New Year fell on a Shabbat, they might blow the shofar in the holy city, but not in the provinces. Okay, so what happens when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat? Today we don't blow the shofar. In the Second Temple period, when Rosh Hashanah fell on Shabbat, they blew the shofar where? in the temple, but in other places they did not blow the shofar. Okay? Apparently because they thought that the shofar was integrally connected to the korbanot, and it has to be done in the place where the korbanot are, even if it's on Shabbat. After the temple was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai ordained, right, the Hebrew says, hitkin, that they might blow in wheresoever there was a court. In other words, wherever there is a court of Jewish law, there they can blow the shofar even on Shabbat. And then we have a story in the Talmud there that I didn't Xerox here, that he used to blow the shofar in Yavne on Shabbat. Okay? Okay? And in the medieval period, we have testimonies from various places, such as the Rif, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi in Spain, and Rabbeinu Manoach in Provence, and a number of other places, that they used to blow the shofar on Shabbat, where? Bivei Din, in the court of Jewish law. In other words, the great sages of that city would get together, and in their presence they would blow the shofar on Shabbat. Why? Because that's exactly what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said. He said, we no longer have Jerusalem. We can't blow the shofar on Shabbat in the temple of Jerusalem. There is no temple. So we have to find a substitute. The substitute is the Beit Din in every place where Jews live. Okay? Similarly, and this affects us directly, Mishnah number 3. Before time, the lulav was carried 7 days in the temple, but in the provinces, 1 day only. Very interesting. In the time of the Beit Mikdash, they only used the lulav for 7 days in the Beit Mikdash. Throughout the rest of the Jewish world, 1 day of Sukkot, 1 day of lulav, not of Sukkot, 1 day of lulav. The other 6 days, no lulav. After the temple was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai ordained that in the provinces it should be carried 7 days in memory of the temple. Okay? In other words, it's a new reality. We can't live on nostalgia. We have to recreate the Jewish religion. And that is exactly what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabbi Gamliel did in Yavne. They invented all sorts of new things that Jews do in Rabbinic Judaism, which they had not previously done. Because if they had stuck to what they had previously done, there would have been no Judaism. It was entirely temple-based. If there was no temple, there was no Judaism. So they had to rewrite the rules of the game, so to speak. And that is why we are Rabbinic Jews. Yes?
Concerning prayer, brachot, before the temple was destroyed, when the temple was there any kind of format of any kind of prayer, or just all began did people make...
There is a little bit of prayer, but certainly not what we do.
In the synagogues, but only came...
There are a number of synagogues from before the destruction. There's a synagogue in Masada. There's a synagogue they discovered in an archaeological excavation in Jerusalem in 1914.
So what was done
No,
there?
Magdala is not that early, I don't think.
So what was done there was...
Okay, it's called a Beit Knesset, a house of gathering. One of the theories is what they did there was read the Torah. But not daven. They didn't need to daven. There was a temple. But to read Torah, they might have done that in the Beit Knesset before the destruction. You can look up at home, or on Rob Google, Mishnah Tamid, chapter 5, Mishnah 1. It describes there sort of a semi-prayer service in the temple by the priests, by the Kohanim, during the late second temple period. It says that early in the morning, the priests would recite the first and second paragraphs of the Shema, and Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments, and a few other passages. That was apparently their daily prayer, but there was no Amidah. The Amidah was invented by the rabbis in Yavne. Okay.
Sorry, which Mishnah is that?
Mishnah Tamid, chapter 5, Mishnah 1. Okay, I'm now segueing forth 1400 years to the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. And this is the sources listed as Gimel. And now the people at home, you can get off your beds and you can sit upright in order to read the text. I got a few smiles at home there. Okay. Okay. The expulsion of the Jews from Spain was a big deal. The Jews had been in Spain at least from the 6th century, in the time of the Visigoths. Some think they were there from the time of the Roman Empire, from the 1st or 2nd centuries. And in the spring of 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella, especially Isabella, she was a very frum Catholic, if you excuse the expression, decided that either the Jews convert to Catholicism or they leave. And they issued the decree. When did they have to leave the country? Anybody know? By what date? Tisha B'Av. Okay.
Same day of the.
That was done on purpose. The Jews have to leave Spain by Tisha B'Av. And by the 7th of Av, they had already left. How many? Estimates are 100,000 Jews. Many of them went to Portugal. Within a short amount of time, they were expelled from Portugal as well. Those who remained had to convert to Catholicism, and they, of course, became the Marranos, and many of them continued to observe Judaism until modern times. Many of them died. Many of them became good Catholics. This was a very big deal. And in this source, which we don't have time to read, we have here a very detailed description of the expulsion of the Jews from Spain by an Italian Jew, an anonymous Italian Jew, which was written in Hebrew, and he describes in great detail what led up to the expulsion and who the leaders of the Jewish people were at that time. There's one very, I don't know if it's cute or depressing, but at the bottom of this page, he talks about Rabbi Don Avram Senior, who was the head of the Spanish Jewish community, whom you've never heard of, and Don Yitzchak Abarbanel, whom you've probably heard of, at least been on his street in Jerusalem. So what happens on the day of expulsion? Rabbi Don Avram Senior converts to Catholicism, and of course Rabbi Yitzchak Abarbanel leaves. Isaac Abarbanel used to call Don Avram Senior Sonné Or. Instead of Senior, Sonné Or, hates light. It's a play on words, right? Senior, Sonné Or. Because he was an Apikoros. He was a heretic. He converted along with his entire family, except for one person, to Catholicism. And then it discusses in great details of the expulsion. So what happens to the Jews who are expelled? So a lot of them at first go to Portugal and then they flee within a few years because they have to by 1497 and 1506. Many of them flee to North Africa. Many of them flee to Italy, the various cities, Naples, where else? Amsterdam, Greece, Turkey, the Balkans, right?
Morocco.
And it was until the Holocaust, you have Ladino-speaking Jews in all of these countries, especially in the Balkans. I grew up in Arlington, Virginia. My father, Rabbi Golinkin, was the rabbi there. One of the active members, her name was Flori Jagoda. She died a few years ago at the age of, she was almost 100 years old.
Everyone had a quota.
Right. Flori Jagoda sang songs in Ladino, and she recorded many of them. You can find them online. That was her native tongue. She was brought up in Ladino in Yugoslavia, in the Balkans. So what happens to the Jews who are expelled from Spain? What happens is that they rebuild Jewish communities all over the Mediterranean basin. And I brought here two texts. Neither of them not that well known, but they should be well known. I'll just tell you something funny. I was looking for an English translation of Gimel Shtayim here. I'll tell you in a minute what the text is. So I wrote in Google, this is the text in Hebrew, Shevet Yehuda Gimel Shtayim. I wrote in Google, Shevet Yehuda, Rabbi Shlomo Ibn Virga, famous passage about a Jew expelled from Spain and his family dies. So what pops up? David Golinkin. I had translated this passage in one of my video Divrei Torah of Schechter 3 or 4 years ago, and that's the only translation I found online of the story. But I can assure you this story has been translated in many books. The fact that it's not online doesn't mean anything. But there is no full translation of this book. So who is Shlomo Ibn Virga? Shlomo Ibn Virga is a Spanish Jew, a doctor, I'm just looking for his biography, which I wrote down here on a piece of paper. He's a doctor, and he born in 1460, and he is, of course, expelled with the Jews of Spain. He runs away to Portugal, and he has to run away from Portugal in 1506, and he ends up, first of all, in Italy and then in Turkey, and he writes this book, Shevet Yehuda, in Turkey around the year 1512, 20 years after he was expelled from Spain. Now, this is a very depressing book. It is a compilation of Jewish tragedies until his time. Lovely. It's a good read for Tisha B'Av. 64 stories. He starts with the destruction of the first temple, then the second temple, and then he goes on through Jewish history. So this is called episode number 52. It's more or less in chronological order. So this is Golinkin's translation of the story on Gimel 2. I'll go to the, on screen, I'll go to the English. I heard from elderly Jews, maybe have somebody else read. Who would like to read the passage in English, please?
I heard from elderly Jews who fled from Spain that a plague broke out on one of the ships, and the captain cast them off in an uninhabited place, and there most died of hunger, but some of them made the effort to walk until they could find a settlement. And one Jew and his wife and 2 sons made the effort to walk, and then the wife fainted and died, and the man carried his sons, and he too fainted, along with his 2 sons due to hunger. And when he awoke from his faint, he found his 2 sons dead. Out of his great anguish, he stood on his feet and said,
and I put this in italics. It's not in italics in the original.
Master of the universe, you are doing much that I should leave my religion. You should know that despite those who reside in heaven, a Jew I am and a Jew I shall remain, and nothing you have brought upon me or will bring upon me will succeed. And he gathered from the dirt and the grass and covered up the boys, and he went to look for a settlement.
Okay, is this a true story? Absolutely not. This is a beautiful legend. But what's the point of the legend? The point of the legend is exactly what the Spanish Jewish exiles did. You got to do everything you can to make us leave Judaism. Despite you, we are going to be Jews. And that is exactly what they did. They went to North Africa and Italy and Turkey and Greece and the Balkans and Eretz Yisrael, which we'll see in a moment, because they decided that by hook or by crook they're going to remain Jewish.
Is this similar to the story of Job?
In general, yes. I thought you were going to ask me a different question. Is this similar to the story of Yossel Rockefeller? Have any of you ever heard that story about the Holocaust? Look it up on the internet.
What's his name?
Yossel Rockefeller. It's a story that purports to take place in the ghetto of Warsaw during the Holocaust, and it's a letter left behind by Yossel Rockefeller. And the key passage in that book sounds exactly like this, but it's a fictional story. And for many, many years, people thought it was a true story. And they finally tracked down the author, and he said, based on this story in Shevet Yehuda. And he has a Jew in the Warsaw Ghetto doing a similar statement, saying, God, you have done everything you can to turn us away from Judaism, but I don't care. I'm still going to be a faithful Jew, even though this may be the last day of my life. So Yossel Rockefeller is based on this. Is this based on Job? In a general sense, yes. Okay, the last story I want to tell you from the Spanish expulsion period is the story of Rabbi Yosef Karo and Rabbi Shlomo Al-Kabetz. I don't know if you heard of Anat Al-Kabetz, whose daughter was killed on October 7th, and she's been in the media a lot since then. Kfar Aza, and she was a student here at Schechter in our MA program. She invited the staff here and the teachers to come to visit her daughter's destroyed home. Her husband's name, I think, is Shlomo, but his last name is Al-Kabetz, and he is a descendant of Shlomo Al-Kabetz. What does Shlomo Al-Kabetz write? Lechadudi. Look at the acrostic. Shlomo Alevi, Shlomo Al-Kabetz. He wrote Lechadudi. Where did he write Lechadudi? In what city? Tzfat. Where did Rabbi Yosef Karo live?
Tzfat.
Okay. How did they get to Tzfat? Why did they get to Tzfat? That's this story. And the story is, and I brought it in my responsum about the history of the Tikkun on Shavuot. If you went to a Tikkun this year or any year, the reason you went to a Tikkun is because of this story. The Tikkun starts with Rabbi Yosef Karo and Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz, who meet in the city of Adrianople, which today is called, I always mispronounce it, Eridne. It's a city in Turkey.
Not Istanbul.
Edirne, Edirne. Edirne, Adrianople. It's a shortened version of Adrianople. It's in the northwest corner of Turkey. Caro is born in Spain in 1488, exiled at the age of 4. Alkabetz is born in Greece in 1505. His parents obviously were exiled from Spain. Alkabetz is Caro's student. They're staying up all night studying in Adrianople. They are mystics. And Rabbi Yosef Karo was not only a mystic, but he practiced mysticism. And he would utter prophecies from his mouth, which he called the Magid, and they were published in this book. The book is called Magid Mesharim, which are the prophecies of Rabbi Yosef Karo. And this is an entire book in English, Rabbi Yosef Karo, Lawyer and Mystic, by Professor Tzvi Wroblewski, which is an explanation of this book. The introduction to the book, Magid Mesharim, is this letter of Shlomo Alkabetz that you have in front of you. Some people think it was originally written in Ladino. And what he describes is that they're staying up all night studying, and that periodically these prophecies are coming out of the mouth of Rabbi Yosef Karo. And one of the prophecies says, you can read it yourselves in the Hebrew or the English, one of the prophecies says, it's very nice that you stayed up all night studying, that's great. Now you have to make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael and do it there. Okay, this is the first Zionist sermon paid for by the Israel Aliyah office, by Nefesh B'Nefesh, okay? In other words, the proper way to study Torah is to move to Israel and study Torah there. Alkabetz moves to Israel, this was in 1530 roughly. Alkabetz moves to Israel, to Tzfat in 1534. Rabbi Yosef Karo moves there in 1535. And the rest is history. That is how the Kabbalistic Center in Tzfat got started. Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, Biari, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, all the Kabbalistic luminaries moved there. They moved there because of this speech coming out of the mouth of Rabbi Yosef Karo in the year 1530. Okay? So one reaction to the expulsion of the Jews of Spain is the reaction of Shlomo ibn Virga in Shevet Yehuda, which is, God, we don't care what you do. We are going to remain Jews. And the other is to make Aliyah to the land of Israel and build Torah centers there. Okay? So these are two of the reactions to the expulsion of the Jews from Spain shortly after 1492. And now we segue to the final chapter, which is, of course, the Holocaust. And as usual, I didn't leave myself enough time. But you can read this entire article of mine in Hebrew and English online. I'm scrolling to the English version. If you write David Golinkin, Israel at 75, you will find it on the Schechter website. It's source Dalet here in the source sheets. It's the last 3 or 4 pages in English. It's first in Hebrew and then in English. It's the same thing. You see it says, responds in a moment, Israel at 75. Okay. So I wrote this article in honor of Israel's 75th anniversary, April 23, which is, of course, before October 7th. And I started out the article with a section called The Miracle of 1948. I don't think that most Jews realize, especially Jews living in Israel, that what happened here in 1948 was a miracle. The people living at the time understood that. I don't think that most Jews living today understand that. Certainly not the younger generation who were so influenced by the media from all over the world. And what I brought here in this beginning of this article is 5 stories about 5 Jews who lived at that time, who understood that the state of Israel was a miracle in reaction to the Holocaust. The first story is on page 2 of my article. It's about Dr. Gabi Bar-Kai, whom unfortunately passed away a few months ago in January. The bottom of the page is labeled page number 2 in the English. It's in brackets. And Gabi Bar-Kai, as you probably know, discovered Birkat Kohanim from the 7th century BCE. No. He was born, Gabi Bar-Kai, I had the pleasure of knowing him for years because he was a member of our synagogue, Moreshet Abraham, in East Dublin.
I learned during his Shiva, he chose Bar-Kai from Breslau. His family were religious.
Right.
Jews in Budapest.
Right. And his great-grandfather was a rabbi. And he was born in the ghetto of Budapest in, as it says here, in 1944. And while the Our Cross Party was murdering 80,000 Jews, most of the Jews in Budapest were murdered by their fellow Hungarians. And he shared a crib with a Sefer Torah. And about 20 years ago, he decided to donate that Sefer Torah to our shul. We had a beautiful ceremony. He asked me to read from it, which I was very proud to do. And it had a very simple mantle on top with no inscription. Racheli bin Nun, who's also a member of our synagogue, is the daughter of Professor Eliezer Schweid and Sabina Schweid, Dr. Sabina Schweid. And she made a parochet for that Sefer Torah, which is one of those verses we saw from Ezekiel chapter 37, the Valley of the Dry Bones. And why did she choose that verse? Because it conveys the personal story of her mother, Sabina Schweid, who spent 15 months hiding underneath a stable with her mother and others in order to survive. And in the spring of 1946, I'm now at the bottom of page 2, in the spring of 1946, they were in a kibbutz, that's the word they use, at a kibbutz of survivors in Mainkopf in Germany. It was before Pesach, and they were preparing for the Seder. And their teacher, Moshe Friedrich, who was an Ilui, a Talmudic genius, who had been ordained at the age of 16, he later died in the battle for Gush Etzion. He did not teach them the traditional text of the Haggadah. What he did is he taught them the Valley of the Dry Bones, Yechezkel chapter 37. As they were rehearsing for the Seder, and they got to the words, Malei Atzamot, was filled with bones, someone began to wail, and they all cried together. And this is what Sabina Schweid writes in her memoir. She is now 95 years old. Even I, who had spent the war in deluxe conditions, meaning under a stable, had been in that valley. Even I remembered the bones poking out of the mass grave, the grave where my father was buried, where all my classmates were buried, all of our friends, the entire city. But Moshe would not let us cry. He continued, and these are the verses from the chapter. Thus said the Lord to these bones, I will cause breath to enter you, and you shall live again. I will lay sinews upon you, and you cover you with flesh. And I will put breath into you, and you shall live again, and you shall know that I am the Lord. And now Sabina Schweid writes, the prophet Ezekiel was talking about us and to us in the voice of Moshe Friedrich, because Moshe, like all of us, was in the same valley filled with very dry bones. In other words, the prophecy of Ezekiel had actually come to life. And that's what the state of Israel is. And the last passage I want to share with you, we're almost finished, is a letter, and I forgot to bring the picture of this, a letter that my father, Rabbi Golinkin Zal, wrote to my first cousin Meir in May of 1951. My father was rabbi in Arlington, Virginia, which is right outside of Washington, and he heard that the state of Israel was about to start selling Israel bonds. And he bought a bond. He didn't realize he had bought the first bond. Wow. The number of the bond is WA00001. Wow. And I have it framed in my office and in my house, and last year Israel Bonds gave it out as a party favor to all the people who came to their convention. And of course my cousin has the original, he never cashed it. And this is what my father wrote to my cousin Mayor in Yiddish, May 9th, 1951. Sweet Yisrael America. I'll scroll down on the screen for those of you at home. You don't have the last page? It's the last 2 pages.
1951.
Okay? The very last pages 5 and 6 in the English. Sweet Yisrael America, tomorrow is your birthday. Tomorrow you receive in the mail a bond from our long dreamt of state of Israel. Today is the first day when the bonds of the Jewish state will go on sale throughout the world. And you will be one of the first to receive a holy bond from the Holy Land. The Yiddish says, a heilige bond from the Heiligen Land. That's what it says in Yiddish. Which will connect your young life with the great fulfilled dream of tens of Jewish generations. You were born in a great time, and as you grow up, let the bond serve you as one of the symbols of your connection to Israel and of your growth, your uncle Noach. Is October 7th depressing? Absolutely. Is our war since then depressing? Absolutely. But if we look at this through the historical perspective of these 4 stories, lo nora, not so terrible. The Jewish people has been in much worse situations than we are now, and we have survived. We will survive this as well. Our main challenge today is that we need to get along with each other, and not our external enemies. We will always overcome our external enemies. We have to overcome our fighting with each other. But the bottom line is, Khurban Bayit Rishon, the first temple, the second temple, the expulsion of Jews from Spain, the Shoah, these were incredibly difficult challenges to the Jewish people. They overcame through their faith in God and through their belief in the Jewish people. Ken Yehi Ratzon, so may it be with us. Yes.